Welcome back to Sports Design School, where we teach you everything you need to know to create high-quality designs in Adobe Photoshop. Today I'm going to be breaking down this Lamar Jackson graphic that I did. I'm going to walk you through step-by-step on how to recreate this entire look. And at the end of the video, I'll even include the PSD for you to download completely free. So you'll be able to go through, view my layers, and edit it in whatever way you would like. Let's get started. Now before we dive in, make sure you like this video and subscribe. I want to be able to keep on giving away free PSDs and awesome tutorials for you guys. And the best way to help me help you guys is by liking this video and helping other people get access to this channel. And also make sure you subscribe to this channel because we have lots of awesome content and lots of awesome videos that we're putting out very, very soon. But let's get started with this design. So it's overall a pretty cool design. It didn't take me super long to create, and I'll just kind of walk you through the basic process I have when creating a design like this. So you always can start by breaking down the different design elements, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So when I look at this design, I see, okay, we have the purple background, we have a cutout right here, a cutout right here, and then text and some other effects on the right side of our image. And so I'm going to attack this design in those steps. So I'm going to start off with our purple background. And we can do that by just going down to this button right here and clicking and hit solid color. And that brings up this color picker tool. I'm going to hide this layer for now, but we're able to double click right here and just pick this shade of purple. Let's see how, yep, that looks pretty good. Nice. So we're done with our background. Next, we need to bring in our cutouts into this image. Luckily enough, I did these cutouts professionally and I included them in one of my past videos for you to download completely free. So I have these already done right here. So I'm just going to click and drag into my new document. And I'm just going to make sure the sizing is about the same. That looks good. And then I'm going to do the same with this other cutout right here. And I'm going to position it about the same spot. Great. We're looking really good so far. Now, one thing I want to note before we dive any further into this is I already have a camera raw filter applied to this Lamar Jackson running cutout right here. And essentially, and I also have an inner glow applied. So the camera raw filter, essentially what it does is it gives it a nice kind of sharp look to your image. So if we zoom in here, you can see if I turn it all the way down, the image gets super flat. But if I turn it up, it highlights a lot of the detail in the image. And anytime you're doing sports designs in Photoshop, camera raw filter is a great way of bringing some pop to your cutouts. The other thing I did is added a subtle inner glow effect to my cutout. So let me turn that off and then turn it on. And you can see it's not a huge effect. It's not going to make a huge difference in your overall design, but what it does is it makes any image look a little bit more like it was shot in a professional studio by adding some nice lighting. And I'll double click so I can show you my settings for that. So I said it's a vivid light with my opacity at 25%. And then I adjust my choke and my size of the inner glow based on my image, but these general settings work most of the time. So now that we have that under the way, let's look at this background image right here. Now you'll notice I have a little bit of a gradient over the bottom of this cutout. I'm going to hide this guy for now. And so likewise, I'm going to just create a new layer. I'm going to use my eye picker tool by pressing I on my keyboard and then clicking on the shade of purple to make sure we have that shade of purple selected. I'm going to press G and then click and hold to bring up my gradient tool. And then I'm going to select our first gradient option right here, and that'll allow me to bring the gradient from the bottom of the screen up to the top and cover up part of our cutout. I'm going to click and drag. And there's no precise way of doing this. It's just whatever feels right. And that looks pretty good to me. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as we get some of the similar elements, it's good enough. So you can see now we have our cutout covered. The other thing I did to this cutout is I added a curves adjustment layer to kind of play with some of the colors a little bit. So I'll show you how I do that. So you go into your adjustments tool and then you hit this curves button. And I'm gonna create this as a clipping mask on this particular cutout layer because I don't want to apply this effect that I'm about to do to all of my layers and affect like the shades of purple and things like that. I just want to affect this Lamar Jackson cutout we're working with. So I can do that by a couple of ways. One, you can right click on that curves layer and then hit create clipping mask, and that'll automatically create a clipping mask on the layer below it. And what that does is it makes it so that effect will only apply to that specific layer. The other thing we can do is just go in between these two layers and hold Alt or Option on our keyboard and then just click, and it creates a clipping mask for us. Now what I'm gonna do is probably bring some of these midtones down just a little bit and then move this up just a little bit. So I talk about this a good bit, but the curves in the bottom left-hand side are the dark parts of your image and the top right side are the light parts of your image. So when we're moving this bottom left point on our curves graph, we're bringing up the dark parts of our image and making them lighter. You can kind of see it there in his visor a little bit. It just gives it a little bit more of a nice professional look. And I might have done that even a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. So now we have our Lamar Jackson cutout done in the background. And then we have our Lamar Jackson foreground element done pretty well as well. Now there's one thing we need to add, and that's this shadow that exists below this front Lamar Jackson cutout. And you can see I created it to make it look like he's just kind of hovering off the ground a little bit. And this is pretty easy to do. So what we're gonna do is create a new layer. And I'm just gonna title this one Shadow. Perfect. And I'm gonna tap B on my keyboard to bring up the brush tool. And for now, I'm just gonna select the soft round brush. And I'm gonna show you all of the settings that you can put in to get this kind of nice shadow look on your designs. Now, you don't have to install any custom brushes or anything like that. This is completely native in Photoshop. So what I'm gonna do is just adjust the size a little bit. I might bring it down to about 95. And then the other thing I'm going to do is here in the top left box of our brush tool, you can actually see this little graph that's showing what our brush looks like in our display. So I'm going to grab this bottom point and just pinch it up. And what that allows us to do is pinch our brush to get a nice flat shadow look. Now the other thing I'm going to do is go over here to my flow and make sure it's set on something like 30. Now if you don't know what flow does, is it allows us to have more gradual control over our brush and build up the effect over time. Let me show you. So if I turn my brush up to 100, and for now let's just turn our brush color to black. You can see how pretty much everywhere I paint with my brush, it covers that part of the image pretty well. But if I turn my flow down to 30, I have more control over where the density of that brush happens. So see, if I go like this, there are some parts that it doesn't build up as much. And that's what we want for a nice subtle shadow. I might actually turn this down even more after looking at that. Let's go to 15. So all I'm gonna do is start off by just painting a little bit of a horizontal shadow like that. Perfect. And I'm just gonna actually title this front foot shadow. We're going to create 2 different shadow layers for this design. And I'm going to big shadow. I'm going to title this second shadow that we're about to create big shadow. And for this one, I'm going to change my brush size up a little bit bigger. And I'm going to turn my flow even lower. Let's change it to 5 now. This is just going to be a big general shadow for the rest of our image. I'm just going to paint a little subtle effect right there. And again, since our flow is turned down, we have nice control over how dense our brush applies to this layer. I might add a little bit more of a big shadow around here. And you can play with this as much as you want to, but for now, that looks pretty good to me. I'm then going to turn down my fill on that layer, and then turn down my fill on our front foot shadow as well. And that looks great. So let's take a review of where we are so far. So we have our back cutout, our front cutout, and our shadow all applied. While we're here, I kind of like the way this curves adjustment tool is working on our back cutout. So I'm just going to duplicate that and apply that to our front cutout as well. So you can do that by just clicking on that layer and holding Alt and then dragging up, and it will duplicate the layer for you. And again, remember, we need to create a clipping mask so it doesn't affect that shade of purple that we're working with. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to group these together so we can see and the difference between what we have and then what we're going to a little bit easier. So the next thing you'll notice, and this is the next part I always try to attack when I'm recreating a design like this, is the text over on the right hand side. Now this is pretty easy to do, and I'll walk through kind of what that looks like. So for now, we're just going to type in Jackson. And the font I use for this design is called Calcio. I'll include a link in the description to where you can pick up this font if you're interested in downloading it for yourself. But I'm just going to size it to fit roughly about the same. And it looks like I just need to turn my kerning back to -25 there. If you don't know what I'm doing with this, I'm adjusting the spacing between the layers. So the bigger this number is, if it's positive and it's a big number, it spreads out your numbers more, and then I'm actually shrinking the distance, so that's why it's negative right now. That's not exactly perfect, but it looks good enough for my eyes. And I'm going to change that color to white. Now the next thing I have to do is do this Lamar text here at the top. And that's just me typing, pressing T and typing Lamar. And this font I used right here is called Integral. Again, I'll leave a link down in the description to that font if you want to use that in your own designs. So I'm just going to type in Integral. And I'm just going to use Integral extra bold. That's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to increase my spacing here. Decrease my size. A little bit more spacing. And that's spot on. Now, if you'll notice in our original design, there's a gold overlay, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. Next, I want to tackle this stripe right next to the Lamar Jackson name right here. And that's pretty easy to do as well. All we're going to do is go over to our rectangle tool, and then I'm going to zoom in to get a little bit more accuracy. I'm going to click and drag until we get to the full length of our rectangle. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to hide this, and I'm going to click on this little icon on the inside of our layer thumbnail, And that allows us to pick the color of our shape. And I'm just going to select this shade of purple right here. That looks pretty good. And next we need to do the same for the white. Now I'm just going to create another rectangle that's white. And I'm going to go like that. And I'm going to choose white for the color. Now I'm going to create a clipping mask between these layers to make sure the white doesn't go outside of that purple rectangle we just created. And you can do that by holding Alt. Perfect. And lastly, we have this gold interior right here. And I'm just going to do something similar. I'm going to create a new layer. Click and drag. And there we go. I'm just going to select a shade of gold for right now. We're going to add that gold overlay later. But I'm going to hit Alt. And there we have it. Our stripe. And so you can see our design is coming along nicely. Now you'll notice our hand of Lamar Jackson is above the Lamar Jackson text here, which we can do that pretty easily. We just need to drag the layers we just created and drag them below this Lamar Jackson text. Perfect. And then it looks like our gradient overlay that we created to hide the bottom part of our Lamar Jackson cutout is getting on top of our Lamar Jackson text. So we're just going to create that as a clipping mask for that particular layer. And that looks pretty good. Now, another thing we need to add to this right side of our image is this signature right here. And so all I did to find the signature is I went over to Google and I typed in Lamar Jackson signature and I found this playing card right here. So I'm just going to drag this into Photoshop. And we don't need this entire image. We really just need the signature part. So I'm going to use this rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to select just the part of the image that we need. From there, I'm just going to hit Command J. And that removes all of that selection from the image. I can then delete the bottom image because we don't need that anymore. From here, there are a couple of ways to do this, but I'm just going to go the easy way and use the magic eraser tool. And I'm just going to erase, just kidding, I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is hit filter. No, I'm going to hit image, adjustments, and threshold. And what that does is it allows me to isolate the dark parts of my image from the light parts of my image. And you can see that looks pretty good. It's a great way of isolating signatures and things like that. When there's it's hard to remove some of the detail. And so now what I'm going to do is simply create a mask right here. And I'm just going to choose a hard round brush, turn my flow back up to 100. And then when you use masks, when you paint black on this little rectangle, everywhere that you paint black, it removes that part of the image. So I'm just going to remove those for now. And now I can use my magic eraser tool on this part of the image and just get rid of the white parts. We don't need those anymore. And now we have just the signature. I'm going to zoom back out. And let's look at our placement of the signature. So it looks right about there. And that looks perfect. Awesome. Now the next thing I included in this original design are these chain overlays in the corner. And that's pretty easy to do as well. I just went to typed in chain PNG and I found this PNG image right here. For now, I'm just going to use the PNG cutout I already have from the original design just because it's a little bit easier for me to edit. Let me see if I can find them. Right here. I'm just going to position it like that. Again, just the exact same chain I'm using in my design. I'm just going to title that chain. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer and then hit edit, transform, rotate 180 degrees, and then just position this chain right there. I'm going to rename this chain chain 2. That looks pretty good. Now I also have this raven overlay on my image right here. And that's pretty simple to do as well. I'm just going to go and type in ravens flying. And I found this image right here. So I'm just going to drag this in and drop it into Photoshop. And so my process for this was pretty similar to the signature. I went into image, adjustments, and threshold again to isolate the birds in my image. I then used a mask to remove all the black parts on the edge that I wasn't wanting to include in my image. That looks pretty good. And then I used my magic eraser tool on the main part of my image. And then let's scale it to fit. Just like that. Perfect. Now it looks like one of our birds right here got cut off, but no worries. This looks fine for now. And now the next thing I did is added a little bit of an optical flare over my image to lighten up the image just a little bit. So I just found this optical flare right here. And there are tons of different places you can find optical flares. You can pay for them at like Creative Market and stuff like that. But if you want more affordable versions, you can just go on to websites like unsplash.com or pexels.com. And they have tons of free, royalty-free flares and things like that that you can use in your images. So I'm going to click and drag into my document. Now I'm just going to position it kind of like that. And for my blending mode, I'm going to choose linear dodge add. And that adds a nice light effect over my image. I'm going to drag all of these layers that we just created back into our folder right here. And you can see we're getting pretty close to our final design. Now we need a couple tweaks. We need to add in our gold overlay to our text right here and right here, and to the signature. And so for this, I just typed in gold texture. And this one came up. And I'll include a link to this down in the description. And I'm just going to drag this into my document. Perfect. And I'm going to drag this and position this over the layers that we want to highlight. So we have the Lamar part of Lamar Jackson. And we're just going to hold Alt. And then I might reposition this a little bit. And there you go. Then we also have the signature, which is this layer right here. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Hold Alt to duplicate. And then position over our signature, and then hold Alt to create a clipping mask. It's that easy. And then our last layer right here is our rectangle. And so we're just going to click, hold Alt, and drag over that gold rectangle. And position right there. Now we're gonna have an issue because this rectangle is a clipping mask of the rectangle underneath it. So to resolve this issue, what we're gonna do is just remove this clipping mask. So we can do that and hit release clipping mask by right clicking on it. And we're just gonna adjust the size to match the rectangle below it. And now we're gonna apply that same clipping mask, and it's that easy. And there we go. Now there's one other tweak I wanna make in this design. You'll notice the purple gradient from our back cutout made its way over to his hand, and we don't really want that. So what we're gonna do is click that mask. We're gonna choose a soft round brush, turn our flow down a little bit, and we're just going to remove the purple gradient from the hand. That's looking pretty good so far. And so you'll notice we're getting pretty close. There was only a few more things we need to add to our image. Now what I actually did is I found this image right here of Lamar Jackson. And I was like, well, let's play around with this effect. And so what I ended up coming up with is this little overlay right here. So I just took that image and I removed the part that Lamar Jackson is in to get some of the stadium bokeh effect. And I added that into our image. So I'll show you what that looks like on top of our layers. You can see all I did, I'll change it back to its original setting so you can see. So I took the image, and let me delete this layer mask as well. So I took the image, and then I added the layer mask, and then I decreased the fill, and then I changed my blend mode to linear dodge add. And that gave us a nice little bokeh effect over our design. And that's looking pretty good. And then there's one more thing I did, and for that I'm going to duplicate the group we just created and then hit Control, Convert to Smart Object. And what that does is it compresses all of our design layers that we just created into one editable object. I'm gonna hit Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and then I'm gonna go down to Effects and add some grain to our image. Let's zoom in to see how much grain we're adding. That looks pretty good to me. And I might add a little bit of a overlay to our corners. That looks pretty good. And there we have it. Our Lamar Jackson design recreated completely from scratch. Now again, I'll include the original PSD down in the description if you want to download that. But leave a like on this video if you learned something new. Leave a comment down below if you have something that you want us to design and go over for you. But guys, thank you for watching so much. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and have a great day.